You only saw it because you were ready, or because someone wanted you to see it now. It was just another ordinary day, nothing special, nothing planned, until you noticed it. Something small, something familiar, something that had always been there, but only now seems to make sense. And the question lingers without asking permission. Why only now? Why not before? That moment is not accidental. It doesn't happen because the world suddenly changed. It happens because something in you did. Your attention shifted, your inner state adjusted, and reality responded. So let this question settle instead of rushing past it. What else might be hidden in plain sight at this very moment? Are there spiritual truths that only appear when you are in a certain state of consciousness? Not because they are secret, but because they require a specific kind of presence to be recognized. If that's true, then what you see says as much about you as it does about the world. And what you don't see yet may not be missing at all. It may simply be waiting for you to arrive. Reality doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't rush to explain itself, and it doesn't unfold like a curtain being pulled back on command. It responds, quietly, precisely, to your level of presence. Think about how many times you've walked the same street, driven the same road, sat in the same room. For years, nothing unusual. Then one day, something shifts. You notice a crack in the sidewalk shaped like a symbol, a sound you've never heard before, a look on someone's face that suddenly tells a whole story. The place didn't change. The moment did. You did. This isn't about distraction in the casual sense. It's not just that you were busy before. It's that your attention wasn't available. Presence is not the same as being awake or alert. Presence is when your attention is not split between now and somewhere else. It's when you're not rehearsing the past or managing the future, while your body moves through the present on autopilot. Reality seems thin when you skim it. It becomes dense when you meet it. There's a reason certain insights only arrive when you slow down, or when you stop trying to extract meaning from everything. Presence changes the resolution of experience. It's like adjusting the focus on a lens. The scene doesn't add new objects, but details begin to appear. Patterns, depth, relationships between things that were invisible when everything was rushed and flat. You've probably experienced this in conversations. Someone speaks, and you hear the words but miss what's underneath. Another time, with the same person, the same tone, you suddenly feel what they're not saying. Their hesitation, their fear, their honesty. Nothing new was added. Your presence made room for it. The world behaves the same way. It doesn't shout its meanings. It offers them in layers. And each layer corresponds to how present you are when you encounter it. When presence is low, reality feels repetitive, predictable, almost dull. Days blur together. You feel like you've seen it all before. But that sense of sameness is not a property of the world. It's a sign that your attention is recycling old interpretations. You're seeing through habits, not through awareness. Presence interrupts habit. It breaks the automatic labeling of things as familiar, boring, already known. And when that happens, reality responds by revealing more of itself. Not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, unmistakable one. Small details carry weight. Ordinary moments feel unusually clear. You don't feel overwhelmed by meaning. You feel aligned with it. This is why moments of deep presence often feel timeless. 5 minutes can feel full, complete, almost spacious. Time hasn't changed. Your relationship to it has. When attention is gathered, experience thickens. When attention is scattered, experience thins out. There's also a reason why forcing awareness rarely works. You can't demand reality to reveal itself. The more you strain to notice something extraordinary, the more you miss what's actually happening. Presence isn't effort, it's availability. It's the absence of internal noise that competes with what's in front of you. Children understand this instinctively. They don't look at the world to confirm what they already believe. They look to discover. That openness allows reality to surprise them constantly. Over time, most adults trade that openness for efficiency. We learn how to move quickly, decide quickly, judge quickly. Useful skills, but costly ones. They reduce presence. And with reduced presence, reality seems less alive. You might notice that certain environments naturally draw presence out of you. Nature is a common one, not because nature is mystical, but because it doesn't demand interpretation. A tree doesn't ask you to agree or disagree. It doesn't care about your opinions. That simplicity quiets the mind, and in that quiet, details emerge, sounds sharpen, colors deepen. You don't create that richness, you receive it. The same principle applies anywhere. A kitchen, an office, a waiting room. Reality is not selective about where it reveals itself. Presence is. This has consequences that go beyond perception. When you're more present, your decisions change. You respond instead of react. You notice early signals instead of dealing with late consequences. You sense when something is off before it becomes a problem. That's not intuition as something mystical. It's perception operating without interference. And here's the part most people miss. Presence is not constant, it fluctuates. Some days you have access to it, other days you don't. That doesn't mean you're failing or regressing. It means reality is dynamic, and your relationship with it is too. Expecting to see everything all the time is another form of control. Reality reveals what matches your current state, not as a reward or punishment, but as a mirror. When presence deepens, the mirror reflects more. When presence contracts, the reflection simplifies. This is why trying to figure out life often leads to frustration. You're asking the mind to solve what can only be perceived. Presence is not a conclusion you reach, it's a condition you enter. And once you do, the world starts to feel less like something you're observing from the outside, and more like something you're participating in. As presence increases, something else becomes clear. You begin to notice that two people can stand in the same place at the same time and walk away with entirely different realities. Not interpretations, realities. Because what you see is not just what's there, it's how your inner state translates what's there. And that opens a deeper question about vision itself, about what your eyes are really doing when you think you're simply looking. What you call seeing is not a neutral act. Your eyes are not cameras quietly recording the world as it is. They are translators, and every translation depends on context, history, and inner state. Light enters your eyes, yes, shapes, colors, movement. But what you experience is not light itself, it's meaning, and meaning is assembled inside you. Two people can look at the same scene and walk away with entirely different experiences. Not because one is wrong and the other is right, but because each one translated the scene through a different inner language. Think of a simple example. A dark street at night. One person feels calm, even comforted by the silence. Another feels tension, danger, urgency. The street didn't change. The information reaching the eyes was almost identical. What changed was the internal filter applied to that information. Memory, emotion, expectation, mood. All of it quietly shaping what the eyes deliver to consciousness. Your nervous system is always asking one question before anything else. Is this safe or not? That question colors everything you see. When safety is assumed, details soften. When threat is expected, details sharpen in a very specific way. You notice shadows more than light, movement more than stillness. Your eyes serve survival first, truth second. This means you never see the world raw. You see a version optimized for what your system believes matters most right now. That belief might be accurate, or it might be outdated. Either way, your eyes follow instructions given from deeper layers within you. This is why emotional states change perception so dramatically. When you're anxious, the world looks harsher, faces seem less friendly, sounds feel louder, time feels faster. When you're calm, the same environment appears more spacious, more neutral, sometimes even beautiful. The external data hasn't changed much. The translation has. What's striking is how convincing this translation feels. It doesn't announce itself as an interpretation. It presents itself as reality. You don't say, I am translating this as threatening. You say, this is threatening. The inner process disappears behind the result. This is useful most of the time. If you had to question every perception, you'd be paralyzed. But it also means that much of what you think you're seeing is actually a reflection of your inner condition at that moment. This becomes especially clear in moments of conflict. two people witness the same event. Each one is certain they saw what really happened. Each one feels justified, and often both are sincere. Their eyes delivered different worlds because their inner references were different. Your past plays a large role here. Experiences you've forgotten consciously still shape how you see. If something once hurt you, your eyes will scan for its return. If something once brought relief, your eyes will seek echoes of it. This happens faster than thought, faster than choice. Even beliefs you don't actively think about guide perception. If you believe the world is generally hostile, you'll notice evidence of that everywhere. If you believe it's generally supportive, you'll notice openings, coincidences, help. The eyes become collectors of proof. This doesn't mean one belief magically changes facts. It means facts are never encountered all at once. You select from them, and the selection process is invisible unless you slow down enough to notice it. Science has shown that the brain fills in gaps constantly. Your visual field is incomplete, yet you experience it as whole. Blind spots are patched over. Missing information is guessed. What you see is partly prediction, a best estimate, not a direct feed. This is not a flaw, it's how perception works. But it carries a quiet implication. Certainty is often an illusion created by a smooth translation process. The clearer something feels, the less you question it. And the less you question it, the more power it has over you. When you begin to see that your eyes translate rather than record, something loosens. You don't lose contact with reality. You gain flexibility. You become less reactive because you recognize that what you're seeing is not the only possible version of what's there. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you curious. Instead of immediately concluding, you pause. You sense that there may be more information available than what your first glance delivered. And here's where it becomes subtle. Once you realize perception is participatory, you start noticing how your attention influences the translation itself. What you linger on grows sharper. What you ignore fades. Your eyes don't just translate passively, they follow your focus. If you dwell on flaws, flaws multiply. If you dwell on threats, the world becomes crowded with them. If you dwell on small signs of coherence, connection, or meaning, those begin to stand out. Not because they were created, but because they were selected. This is not about positive thinking. It's about recognizing that attention is not neutral. It's directional. And direction shapes what becomes real for you. At a certain point, the line between seeing and doing begins to blur. You realize that observation is not just reception, it's engagement. Something in you leans towards certain aspects of the world, and those aspects respond by becoming more vivid in your experience. And that leads naturally to a deeper question, one that most people never stop to ask. If perception is translation, and translation depends on attention, then what exactly happens when you focus on something steadily? What is set in motion when you truly notice? There is a quiet consequence to observation that most people never consider. The moment you truly notice something, it doesn't remain neutral. It becomes active in your experience. Attention is not just awareness, it's participation. You can sense this in everyday life. Think about a small irritation you barely noticed at first. A sound, a comment, a thought. The more you return to it, the louder it becomes. Not because it objectively grew, but because your attention fed it. What was once background noise moved to the center of your inner world. The same is true in the opposite direction. When you begin to notice moments of ease, brief clarity, small signs of alignment, they also grow. They gain weight. They start influencing your mood, your choices, your posture toward the day. Observation gives energy a direction. This is not mystical language, it's practical. Your nervous system allocates resources based on what you focus on. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Circuits strengthen with use. When you repeatedly observe something, you're not just seeing it, you're reinforcing the pathway that makes it noticeable in the first place. This is why attention feels so powerful and so dangerous at the same time. Whatever you keep in view becomes more real to you, not metaphorically real, functionally real. It affects how you think, how you react, how you interpret what comes next. Many people believe they are simply noticing what is already important, but often it works the other way around. Things become important because they are noticed. A fear becomes central because it's monitored. A desire becomes urgent because it's rehearsed. A belief becomes solid because it's constantly checked against experience. Your inner world is not shaped only by big decisions. It's shaped by countless small acts of observation that go unquestioned. Where your attention rests when no one is watching matters more than what you claim to value. This is why breaking a habit is rarely about force. It's about starving it of attention. The moment you stop tracking something obsessively, it begins to lose energy. It doesn't disappear instantly, but it weakens. Meanwhile, what you turn toward begins to strengthen, even if it starts small. In spiritual traditions, this principle was often described in poetic terms. Energy follows attention. What you contemplate, you invite. But stripped of poetry, the insight remains practical. Attention organizes experience. It decides what moves from potential to actual in your inner landscape. This doesn't mean you control everything you observe. Some things grab your attention before you can choose. Pain, danger, strong emotion. But what you do after the initial moment matters. Do you keep returning to it? Do you build a story around it? Do you let it define your perception of everything else? Observation is never a single act. It's a relationship over time. And relationships change both sides. There's a subtle feedback loop at work. You notice something. That noticing activates a response in you. That response changes your state. Your new state changes what you notice next. Without awareness, this loop runs automatically. With awareness, it becomes visible. This is where many people misunderstand the idea of influence. They imagine that observing something magically alters the external world. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it always alters the observer. And a changed observer meets the world differently. If you spend a day noticing obstacles, you'll end the day feeling blocked. If you spend a day noticing opportunities, you'll feel movement, even if nothing dramatic happened. The external facts may be similar. The internal activation is not. This explains why two people in identical circumstances can live in entirely different realities. One feels trapped, the other feels challenged. One feels abandoned, the other feels independent. Their attention activates different aspects of the same situation. You can see this clearly in learning. The moment you start paying attention to a subject, examples of it appear everywhere. Not because the world suddenly filled with them, but because your perception became tuned. Observation activates recognition. The same thing happens with meaning. When you start noticing patterns, coincidences, subtle alignments, your mind becomes sensitive to them. They begin to stand out. They guide your decisions. They shape your sense of direction. Skeptics call this projection. Believers call it guidance. But underneath the labels, the mechanism is the same. Attention activates relevance. The danger is not that observation has power. The danger is forgetting that it does. When you don't realize that attention activates, you let it be pulled by habit, fear, or constant stimulation. You activate things you never consciously chose. When you do realize it, a new responsibility appears. Not a heavy one, a quiet one. You start asking yourself what you're feeding with your attention, what inner pathways you're strengthening, what version of reality you're rehearsing day after day. This doesn't require constant vigilance. It requires honesty, a willingness to notice where your gaze naturally goes when nothing demands it. That's where activation is happening most strongly. As this becomes clearer, another insight begins to emerge. If observation activates, then the observer is not separate from what is observed. There is an interaction taking place, a meeting. And that raises an even deeper question about your role in the reality you experience, not just as a witness, but as part of the equation itself. Most people move through life as if reality is something happening over there, separate from them, complete on its own. They imagine themselves as witnesses, looking out at a finished world. But that separation is more assumed than examined. When you look closely, it begins to fall apart. Every experience you have is a meeting point. What's out there and what's in here intersect. The world provides conditions, events, signals. You bring interpretation, attention, memory, expectation. What you call reality is not one or the other. It's the result of both. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It's something you can notice directly. Think about how your day unfolds when you wake up already tense. The same events occur, but they feel heavier. Conversations seem sharper. Small delays feel personal. Now compare that to a day when you wake up grounded. The same events pass through you differently. Nothing external may have changed, yet the reality you live inside is not the same. That difference is you, not your personality, but your state. And that state is always present in the equation, whether you acknowledge it or not. For a long time, science tried to remove the observer from the picture. The goal was objectivity, purity, a view from nowhere. But even in controlled experiments, something kept appearing. The act of measurement affected the outcome. The observer couldn't be fully erased. This wasn't a mystical discovery, it was an uncomfortable one. Long before that, inner traditions spoke about the same thing in simpler language. They said the world you experience is shaped by the one who experiences it, not as a punishment or reward, but as a natural law. When you change, what appears to you changes. This doesn't mean the world bends to your wishes. It means the world meets you where you are. Your fears tune you to certain signals. Your openness tunes you to others. You don't create the entire landscape, but you determine which parts of it come into focus. This is why advice that works perfectly for one person can feel useless to another. Each person is standing in a different internal position. The same instruction passes through different filters and produces different results. The equation is never just the instruction, it's instruction plus observer. You can see this clearly in moments of transition. When something in you shifts, suddenly opportunities appear where none existed before. People call this luck or timing, but often it's alignment. You're now able to respond to things that were previously invisible or irrelevant to you. The opposite is also true. When you're stuck in a rigid inner state, reality feels narrow, repetitive, options seem limited. It's not that possibilities vanished, it's that your position in the equation restricts what you can access. This is why trying to change reality without changing your relationship to it often leads to exhaustion. You push harder, control more, analyze endlessly, but the core variable remains untouched. You are still showing up in the same way, expecting a different outcome. When you begin to sense that you are part of the equation, responsibility takes on a new meaning. Not blame, not pressure. Responsibility as responsiveness. The ability to notice how you are participating in what you experience. This can feel unsettling at first. It removes the comfort of complete victimhood, but it also removes the helplessness that comes with it. You may not control circumstances, but you influence the interaction. And influence over time matters. Even suffering looks different through this lens. Pain still hurts, loss still grieves, but there's a distinction between pain and the identity built around it. When you recognize your role in the equation, you can allow pain without letting it define the entire reality you see. This awareness also softens judgment. When you realize that everyone is experiencing a different reality shaped by their inner state, it becomes harder to reduce people to their actions alone. You begin to sense the unseen variables at play. Importantly, this doesn't mean retreating into your head or becoming self-absorbed. It's the opposite. It's realizing that your presence matters, that how you enter a room changes the room, that how you listen changes what is said, that how you look changes what is revealed. You don't have to do anything special to be part of the equation. You already are. The only question is whether you are conscious of it. And here's where many people make a subtle mistake. Once they hear this idea, they try to use it to force perception, to see more, to access answers, to extract meaning. They attempt to look harder, faster, more intensely, without adjusting the way they are being. But reality doesn't respond to strain, it responds to alignment. There's a difference between looking and being ready to see. When those two are confused, frustration follows. The search becomes noisy. Signs are demanded instead of received. Understanding that you are part of the equation naturally leads to another realization. Seeing is not just about looking outward. It depends on how you are inwardly positioned before you look. And that raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. What happens when the desire to see runs ahead of the capacity to be present? There is a quiet mistake that shows up again and again in people who are sincerely searching. It doesn't come from arrogance or ignorance, it comes from urgency. The urge to see something meaningful before becoming the kind of person who can receive it. Many people want insight, clarity, signs, confirmation. They want to understand what life is doing, where they are going, what everything means. So they look harder, they analyze more, they collect ideas, symbols, explanations. And yet, the more they try to see, the more distant everything feels. This happens because seeing is not just an act of the eyes or the mind. It's a consequence of being. When the inner state is unsettled, fragmented, or strained, perception reflects that. You might receive information, but it doesn't land. It doesn't integrate. It stays abstract or it turns into frustration. Think about moments when you were exhausted or emotionally overloaded. Even simple things felt confusing. Someone explained something to you and it just didn't register. Later, when you were calmer, the same explanation suddenly made sense. The information didn't change. Your capacity to receive it did. Trying to see before being is like tuning a radio without adjusting the frequency. You keep turning up the volume, hoping clarity will arrive through force. But all you get is noise. This mistake often hides behind spiritual ambition, the desire to wake up, to understand, to transcend confusion. There's nothing wrong with that desire. But when it's driven by impatience, it turns against itself. You begin to chase experiences instead of cultivating the conditions that allow them to appear naturally. You might notice this in meditation, reflection, or prayer. The moment you sit down wanting something specific to happen, the mind tightens. You're no longer present, you're negotiating with the moment. You're measuring it against expectations, and that measuring blocks what you're hoping to find. Being comes first, not as a rule, but as a fact. Your inner posture determines what can show up. If you're agitated, you'll perceive agitation. If you're grasping, you'll perceive absence. If you're quietly open, perception softens, and meaning has room to arrive. Many people confuse effort with sincerity. They believe that if they strain enough, clarity will reward them. But clarity doesn't respond to strain. It responds to coherence, to a settled attention that isn't pulling experience apart. There's also fear hidden in the urge to see too quickly. Seeing feels like control. If I can just understand what's happening, I can relax. If I can just get a sign, I'll know what to do. Being, on the other hand, requires staying with uncertainty. It asks you to remain present without guarantees. This is uncomfortable. The mind prefers answers to openness. Answers feel solid. Openness feels vulnerable. So the mind rushes ahead, searching for conclusions before the inner ground is stable enough to hold them. But insight that arrives too early becomes another belief to defend. It doesn't liberate, it adds weight. You see this when people cling to ideas they haven't lived yet. The ideas sound true, but they don't transform behavior. They sit on top of unresolved tension. Being is slower. It doesn't provide immediate explanations. It works through small shifts, through noticing how you react, through allowing feelings to be felt instead of analyzed, through letting silence do some of the work. When being is neglected, perception becomes distorted. You start seeing what you want to see or what you fear seeing. Confirmation replaces discovery. Everything becomes a sign or nothing does. Both extremes come from the same imbalance. There's a simple way to recognize when this mistake is happening. If your search feels tense, contracted, or compulsive, you're likely trying to see before being. If your attention feels forced, as if you're chasing something just out of reach, you're ahead of yourself. This doesn't mean you stop seeking. It means you shift the direction of the effort. Instead of asking, "Man, what am I supposed to see?" the quieter question becomes, "How am I showing up right now?" That question doesn't demand an answer. It invites awareness. When you attend to being, seeing adjusts on its own. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with a sense of rightness. You begin to notice that insights arrive when you're not hunting them. They appear in ordinary moments, while walking, while listening, while doing something simple. This can feel almost unfair to the part of you that worked so hard to figure things out, but it's also a relief. You realize you don't have to force reality to speak. You have to make yourself available to listen. And availability often begins with letting go of control, of timelines, of expectations, of the need to manage how and when meaning should appear. The moment you stop trying to orchestrate perception, something shifts. There's a softness that enters when being takes precedence over seeing, a willingness to not know yet, to stay with the present without extracting conclusions from it, and it's often in that exact softness that something responds. Quietly, precisely, as if reality had been waiting for you to stop pushing and simply open. There is a noticeable shift that happens when you stop tightening around life and begin to open to it. Not in a dramatic way, not with fireworks or certainty, but with a quiet responsiveness that feels almost personal. Things start to meet you halfway. Moments line up, not perfectly, not constantly, but often enough to be felt. Opening yourself is not about becoming passive or naive. It's about relaxing the inner grip that insists on control. When that grip loosens, your attention becomes receptive instead of defensive. And in that state, you notice how often reality is already offering small responses that were previously drowned out by noise. You may have experienced this during moments of silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of inner commentary. You stop narrating your experience, even briefly, and something subtle happens. A thought arrives that feels helpful rather than repetitive. A feeling clarifies instead of confusing. An external cue catches your eye at exactly the right moment. These are often dismissed as coincidence, and maybe they are. But coincidence doesn't mean meaningless. It means events coinciding. The question is not whether the universe is sending messages. The question is whether you are in a state that can notice patterns without forcing them. When you're closed, everything feels random or hostile. Signals blur together. You miss timing because you're either too early or too late, mentally speaking. When you are open, timing feels different. You arrive just as something is available. You leave just before something drains you. Not because you planned perfectly, but because you were listening. Opening yourself also changes how you interpret obstacles. Instead of immediately labeling them as resistance, you begin to sense information within them. A delay might reveal something you hadn't considered. A missed opportunity might protect you from a path that wasn't aligned. This doesn't make disappointment disappear, but it softens the story around it. The key difference is trust, but not blind trust. It's a functional trust, a willingness to stay present without rushing to conclusions. When you're open, you don't need everything to make sense immediately. You allow meaning to unfold in stages. This openness is often mistaken for belief, but belief can exist without openness. You can believe in many things while remaining tense and closed. Openness is experiential. It's felt in the body, in the breath, in the way your attention moves without being pushed. You might notice that when you're open, your body feels slightly more spacious. Your breathing is less shallow. Your movements are less abrupt. These are not spiritual signs, they're physiological ones. They indicate that your system is not in a defensive mode. In that state, perception changes. You're more sensitive to nuance. You notice subtle shifts in tone, mood, direction. You don't overreact to every stimulus. You sense which ones matter. That discernment is what makes responses feel timely, even graceful. This is why many meaningful moments happen when you least expect them. Not because expectation is wrong, but because expectation often narrows focus. Openness widens it, and with a wider field of attention, more connections become possible. There's also an emotional honesty that comes with opening. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You stop demanding answers when you're tired. You allow yourself to be where you are. Paradoxically, that acceptance often invites movement. People sometimes ask why clarity arrives in moments of vulnerability. The reason is simple. Vulnerability removes armor. Armor blocks not just pain, but information. When you lower it, you feel more, yes, but you also perceive more. This doesn't mean you become unprotected. It means you become responsive instead of rigid. You adjust instead of resist. You respond instead of react. That responsiveness creates a feedback loop. The more you respond accurately, the more reality seems to meet you accurately. It's easy to romanticize this and imagine a universe constantly arranging events for you, but the response is often modest. A chance encounter, a sentence in a book, a sudden sense to pause instead of rushing. These are small, but their impact compounds. The challenge is that openness cannot be forced. The moment you try to open in order to get something, you close again. Openness happens when you release the demand for outcome, when you stop asking reality to prove itself. This is why silence plays such a role. Not external silence, but inner. When you stop filling space with expectations, something else enters. Not always immediately. Sometimes after patience, sometimes after doubt. And here's where the pattern becomes even more precise. There are moments when response only comes after you stop trying to manage the timing entirely. When control drops completely, even briefly, something appears. A clarity, a sign, a direction. As if reality was waiting for that exact opening, that exact second when you were no longer interfering with the process. There is a very specific moment many people recognize only in hindsight. The moment when you finally let go. Not because you solved everything, not because you felt confident, but because you were exhausted from trying to manage every outcome. And strangely, that is often the exact moment something appears. You weren't forcing clarity anymore. You weren't scanning for meaning. You weren't demanding a sign. You had, for a brief instant, stepped out of the way. And in that space, something moved. This is difficult for the mind to accept because control feels like responsibility. Letting go can feel like failure. But control is often just tension dressed up as effort. It's the constant inner grip that says, I need to understand this now, or everything will fall apart. When that grip loosens, perception changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes generous, but because your attention is no longer narrowed by insistence. You stop looking for one specific answer and become available to what is actually happening. Many people describe this as timing that feels almost scripted. You stop trying to fix a relationship, and a conversation happens naturally. You stop obsessing over a decision, and clarity arrives during a walk or a shower. You stop pushing yourself to feel something, and emotion moves on its own. What's important here is not the event itself, but the condition under which it appears. It doesn't arrive when you're tense and negotiating with reality. It arrives when you're present enough to receive without grabbing. Control interferes because it comes with a hidden assumption that reality must be forced into coherence, that without your constant management, things will go wrong. This assumption keeps the nervous system alert, scanning, braced. In that state, even helpful signals can be missed. You're too busy looking for confirmation of your fear or your plan to notice what's actually being offered. Letting go, even briefly, tells your system that it's safe to listen, that safety opens perception, and in that opening, things that were already there become visible. This is why signs often feel simple, a sentence overheard at the right time, a memory that suddenly reframes the present, a small external event that resonates deeply. They're not impressive on the surface. Their power comes from timing, not from spectacle. Trying to control timing is especially counterproductive. The more you demand answers now, the more you close off the process that delivers them. It's like pulling on a door that opens by sliding. Effort increases resistance. There's also humility in this moment of release. You admit, even silently, that you don't know how this will unfold. That admission is not weakness, it's alignment with reality. Life is complex. Outcomes are rarely linear. Control simplifies in ways that distort. When you stop trying to control, you allow complexity back in. And complexity carries information. It carries nuance. It carries pathways your mind couldn't have planned. This doesn't mean you abandon responsibility or intention. It means you stop confusing tension with effectiveness. You can act without gripping. You can care without constricting. You can intend without demanding. Often, the sign that appears at this moment doesn't answer everything. It answers just enough. A next step, a reassurance, a redirection. It rarely gives the full picture, but it gives orientation. And that orientation feels different from conclusions you forced. It feels quieter, less dramatic, more trustworthy. Not because it guarantees success, but because it feels aligned with where you actually are. The irony is that many people miss these moments because they dismiss them. They think, that was nothing, or I'm probably reading too much into it. But the body often knows before the mind agrees. There's a subtle sense of rightness, of resonance, that doesn't need explanation. Control wants certainty. These moments offer coherence instead. Coherence doesn't explain everything. It simply fits. As you reflect on this pattern, you may begin to notice how often signs were present long before you saw them. They didn't appear late. You arrived early with too much agenda. When you finally stop trying to orchestrate how and when meaning should show up, something else becomes possible. You realize that signs are not withheld as punishment. They're timed to moments of readiness. And readiness is not about knowledge. It's about posture, about how you're standing in relation to life. When that posture softens even slightly, the field of perception widens. This naturally leads to a more unsettling question. If signs appear only when control drops, then what might still be hidden right now, not because it's absent, but because your grip hasn't loosened enough yet? There is a question that rarely gets asked honestly, because it doesn't point outward. It turns the attention back toward you, right into the space you usually move past without looking. What is hiding from you right now? Not hiding because it's secret, not hiding because it's forbidden, hiding because the way you're currently looking cannot receive it. Most people assume that if something important existed, it would announce itself clearly. It would be obvious, loud, impossible to miss. But life doesn't work that way. What matters most often arrives quietly, disguised as something ordinary, waiting for a particular angle of attention. Think about how often you've understood something only after the moment passed. A relationship, a choice, a pattern you couldn't see while you were inside it. The information was there the whole time, but you weren't positioned to recognize it. Not because you were incapable, but because you were oriented differently. So the question is not, what am I missing? The deeper question is, from where am I looking? Your current state filters what can appear. If you're tense, you'll miss what requires softness. If you're rushing, you'll miss what unfolds slowly. If you're trying to protect yourself, you'll miss what requires openness. None of this is wrong. It's human, but it has consequences. There may be an answer already circling your life, repeating itself in subtle forms, in conversations that feel oddly familiar, in situations that keep returning with slightly different faces, in a discomfort you keep trying to solve instead of listen to. Repetition is often a signal, not of failure but of unread information. What's hiding from you may not be something new. It may be a new way of seeing something old. Sometimes what's hidden is a simple truth you've been postponing, not because you don't know it intellectually, but because you're not ready to live it. Readiness isn't moral, it's practical. It's about capacity, about timing, about what you can hold without collapsing into fear or control. Other times what's hidden is an option you've dismissed too quickly. A quieter path, a slower answer, something that doesn't match the story you've been telling yourself about how things are supposed to go. When identity gets involved, perception narrows. You don't see what threatens the version of yourself you're trying to maintain. Not consciously, automatically. This is why stillness can feel uncomfortable. When external stimulation drops, the filters loosen. You begin to sense what you've been avoiding, not dramatically, gently, as a subtle pull or resistance, a thought you quickly replace, a feeling you name something else. What's hiding from you might also be something you already sense but don't trust, an intuition you keep questioning, a knowing that doesn't come with proof. The mind prefers certainty, and intuition rarely offers it up front. It offers direction, not guarantees. So you wait. You ask for more signs. But sometimes the delay isn't because the signal is weak. It's because you're asking for confirmation instead of contact. There's also the possibility that what's hiding from you is not outside at all. It may be a part of yourself that doesn't fit neatly into your current life structure. A desire that would require change, a boundary you haven't enforced, a truth that would disrupt comfort. The mind is very good at keeping these things just out of focus, not out of malice, but out of protection. It believes it's keeping you safe, but safety can quietly turn into limitation. If reality shows you only what you are ready to see, then readiness becomes the real work, not striving, not searching. Readiness is about honesty, about noticing where you tense up, where you rush, where you insist. It's about observing your own gaze. What do you look at repeatedly? What do you avoid? What do you label as unimportant too quickly? What's hiding from you is often hiding behind familiarity. You've seen it so many times that you stopped seeing it. You've explained it away, normalized it, reduced it to something manageable. And yet something in you knows there's more there. This isn't an invitation to overanalyze your life or doubt every perception. It's an invitation to soften the way you look, to allow the possibility that clarity may not come as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet recognition. A moment when something clicks, not because it's new, but because you are. If you stay with this question without trying to answer it immediately, something begins to shift. Your attention becomes more spacious, less demanding, and in that space, what was hidden doesn't need to push its way in. It can simply appear. You were never blind. Nothing essential was kept from you. What felt hidden was waiting for the moment you became present enough to notice. The world didn't change. The signal didn't arrive late. You simply woke up to what had been there all along. Awakening is rarely dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It feels like remembering something you once knew, then forgot. A soft clarity. A quiet alignment. You begin to trust your perception again, not because it's perfect, but because it's alive. If something in this journey resonated with you, let it stay with you for a moment. Let it work on you without rushing to define it. And if you're still here, write this sentence in the comments, so I know you reached the end. I am present enough to see. If this spoke to you and you want to go deeper, choose one of the videos appearing on your screen now. They continue this exploration, gently, honestly, without noise.